Welcome to the Vigor Life Podcast, a source of inspiration, lessons, stories, skill sets, mindsets, and strategies to invigorate and expand all areas of your life. Let's go. Hey, what is going on? Coach Luka back here with the Vigor Life Podcast. I don't know if you guys can see me, but it's a rainy day in Seattle, so I decided to be very fluorescent today. I'm even going to slide back so you can see the shoes matching. You know what I mean? I'm trying to be the sunshine in people's life today. Hey, but if you're watching this on YouTube, it's probably black and white. I'm just letting you know. It is fluorescent up in this mofo. Check this out. Today, I said, okay, I'm going to dive into coaching. And, you know, this is going to be an overview, because I said, I'm going to work on nutrition today. And then I keep going back to, you know, I'm always looking like the questions that get asked. I'm always looking at my own coaching with my clients or our clients, both from the nutrition standpoint, but also from a business standpoint. So I decided to go back into my notes, and like you will see, this is this is old school. This is years old. It's like I pulled it out it's like a relic. But some of the stuff in here is magical. So I wanted to share it with you. And it pertains to, you know, how most people coach. And this was like a big breakthrough for me. And some of the things that I learned, I would say were from Dax Moya, and then I started digging deeper. And then, by the way, Dax is on some genius level when it comes to that. You should definitely check him out. Love that dude. But it kind of went down a rabbit hole, and you know, started understanding that like this was actually this time where I really started shifting. You know, kind of my understanding of how I was coaching people, and you know, to what it is now, right? And I think a lot of people still live, unfortunately, in a lot of the tell people what to do. And so I'm going to attack this and address this both from like somewhat of I'm not going to go too deep into science. I'm going to touch on it a little bit, right? Like talking about, like I said, the reptilian brain and prefrontal cortex, and, you know, how our brain operates. But the reality is that we train, or should I say, we coach most people that are in some type of threat. And so it starts here, right? That one of the things that we have to understand, you know, our frontal lobe is, you know, the place where we think and we thrive, right? It's evolution. But our survival mechanism is obviously an older part of the brain, right? A lot more fight, flight, or freeze. And that part is, I would say, the reptilian brain. So we have to understand that you can't access your thrive part of the brain when you're in your survive part of the brain. And think about that. Every goal that your client has is a thrive goal. But then it's hard to access that when you're in survive mode, right? There's only threat. So we have to understand like how threat operates, because, you know, most people are going to say, well, you know, how are my clients threatened? And I mean, like, we're talking about on every level. Like, threat comes from, I mean, it can come from endocrinology, but it can come from obviously verbal communication. It can come from majority of its perception and stories. And that's what we're going to touch on a little bit today, right? So when you say, you know, my clients are making bad choices, you know, think about it this way. A choice is made in the prefrontal cortex, right? Because you have to, it comes in the logical part of the brain. But they're not really accessing that when they're in survive mode. You know, so that bad choice is not like this majority of the time a cognitive choice. It's like pattern, right? So when people are reacting, it's the reptilian part of the brain that's responding, and not the temporal lobe, right? And I'm trying to say temporal lobe. But like most clients' threat is perception based. So think of it in a way of like, it's the stories that they create. And I would say, like, as I'm speaking about this, like this goes from me and you too, right? Everything that I'm talking about is like, yeah, it's your clients, and a lot of it stems back to you. But we'll touch on that on that in a second, because this might be one of the more, you know, if you're a coach in any category, like this is something that it's very, very, very important. That's why I wanted to bring it up today, because, you know, there's a lot of strategic and tactical stuff. And actually, I'll cover some of it, but that we go through when we're coaching nutrition and fitness and business and marketing, whatever it may be. But we don't kind of go into this foundational part of it. And then we say stuff like, how people are just making bad choices. Like, I don't understand. Like, I told them what to do, but they're not doing it. And this is the part that we have to understand here, right? And remember, if threat is perception based, it comes from the stories, the thoughts, that people have that create that threat, and not sensory. Like sensory is like, hey, I'm putting a gun to your head. Like it's real. It's now. The lion's attacking you. Majority of threat doesn't stem in this day and age from that, right? So you got to understand that it's the same thing as like if you got injured, right, back in the day from a jump, then you start thinking the story is every jump is going to injure me, right? So think about that and think about all the different thing and aspects and why questioning is so important with your clients. But that's a perfect example. I know, like, great example for Christmas, I had my back injury flare up again, really bad. I mean, really bad. I couldn't walk. And it was kind of like one of the out of nowhere scenario. How long it took for me to like start deadlifting a little heavier again. But it wasn't. The reality is I was ready for it, but the story was right, and it actually didn't even injure my back doing a deadlift. But back in the day when I injured my back, I did. So think about how like all these things are interconnected and how our clients' stories, right, are creating this threat that's creating these bad choices that really are just patterns, right? So we have to help our clients investigate their stories, right? So it's like this is the threat like that I just brought up, like my injury. It's like the threat from hurting your back versus standing in front of a cougar, right? Like it's a very, very different threat. Like one is story based, one is like true, real, sensory, right now based, right? So think about it this way too, that like one of the things that people don't think about is threat, because I want to bring up different examples of what all are threats in our clients and our lives that we don't think about. And then because we don't, we start making recommendations and judgments around why people are doing things or not doing things. So, time is a major factor in threat, right? And think of it this way, that we have to, no matter what the threat is, because think too fast, too slow, or, is a threat. So if somebody, has ever been in a program and you never had a conversation with them and it ends up being, this is not working because there's no, I would say expectation, or there's no communication about what's going to happen. And remember, like, what is threat? Like not knowing what's going to happen, right? It's basically the unknown. It creates uncertainty and anxiety, and that's threat. So time is a big factor in communicating with clients about the realities of what happened, right? Now, I'm going to go back to this. So the thing about fear is that, we have to kind of floodlight the fears and bring them out, because if people are hiding them, right, we can never really address the true issue. But if we shine a light on them, there's two things that happen. Like people actually see that those fears are not real, or at least even if they are real, that there's something that they can do about them, right? They're empowered to do something about the fear. So it's not, you have to understand coaching is going from the person who gives the right answers to the person who asks the right questions. And you notice how many times in the podcast I bring up questions. It's a very big thing. And it's also one of the reasons why, why is public speaking the biggest perception-based fear? Is because, and why we give kudos to people that do public speaking, right? Because there's such a threat because we feel like we're going to be judged, right? And this creates big stories. Persecution, judgment, what will people think about me, embarrassment. And so that story creates the whole fear of getting in front of people and speak. And I talked about in one of the previous podcasts about my fears about speaking that were that as well, right? So coaching starts with telling the truth about yourself to yourself. A great book here is to dig into is Conversations with God. But and I'm gonna kind of skip forward a little bit and come back. But step one is tell the truth about yourself to yourself, then tell the truth about yourself to others. Only then can you start telling the truth about others to others, right? And the reality is that we don't investigate our own stuff. And when it comes to coaching, I'd have you consider that, we kind of mirror our own fears or our own judgments onto our clients. So as I'm going through some of these principles, or I should say some of this coaching knowledge, start with yourself. Like, start with yourself as far as, what's going on in your life, because you have to keep exploring those things. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really hard to dig into your client's life, right? Now, to come back to this this is a statement that you could like put quotation marks around, right? It's that powerful. So look at your client and ask yourself what your biggest fear is. Then understand that they're in the same position, but with a different fear, right? Like, that gives you compassion and empathy. And we've talked about how important empathy is, but I don't think that we really stop and explore that. And I think that's one of the biggest like statements, or should I say drills, that you can do is, look at your client, ask yourself what your own biggest fear is, and understand that they're in the same position, but with a different fear. And for me, that was like, for instance, I had a lot of kind of like relationship trauma in the last years, and that was very painful and threatening and fearful and all these different things. Whereas in fitness, I had, none of that, right? And I had to like dive into that area to go like, oh man, like this is really difficult. Like, this is exactly how this person feels about overcoming emotional eating, or, like I said, food and fitness, and how tough it is, and changing their social environments because it's driving them down the wrong thing. Like, these are the type of fears they have, and I had to explore my own fears, and that made me a better coach, because when you do that, you go like, oh shit, man, that is tough. That's really, really tough, right? And from there, like, just know that your job is not to get the result, but to get the person, Mary, John, Joe, whoever, out of their own way so they can get the result. Like, let me repeat that, right? Your job is not to get the result, but rather to get, Mary, John, or whoever out of their own way to get the result, right? Because the reality is, and we talked about belief, right? How we respond. There's been all these studies done about like belief, right? If a child doesn't believe that they can learn something, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, they're not going to do the action steps associated with it. And just like I talked about the magical question that we ask, right? How confident are you on a scale of 1 to 10 that you can do this 90% of the time? That's a belief question, right? We kind of assess how much people believe that they can get a result. But remember, if your clients don't believe that they can win, so whatever their win is, they essentially, they won't go and play the game, right? They won't fight. They'll freeze or they'll fight, right? So if we have fight, flight, or fight, or freeze, I'm getting the F's all messed up. But if they don't believe that they can win, they won't fight, right? They'll run or they'll freeze. Think about that, right? So we're coming back to belief and like helping them believe that they can actually do this. And for that, we have to reduce threat, okay? So the thing is, the hardest part of being a great coach is getting out of your own way, right? Because if you start going back to, I would say, because you know what the sedation part is? The sedation part is that you start always telling people what to do, right? And we're going to get here in a second because like I said, I got notes, so I'm like pausing a little bit. Don't be scared of the pauses. Don't be scared of the pauses in coaching either. So there you go. All right, so with that said, truly great coaching is about defining safety and threat, right? And remember, safety is the ability to predict the immediate. That's deep, right? Safety is the ability to predict the immediate. So how can you help people predict what's going to happen? And that happens with agreements. And I don't like the word expectations, but think about it of it this way. If you have, we talked about choice before and self-determination theory, right? And when we give a client a choice and they make that choice, they're more committed to what they chose, right? It's autonomy, right? It's empowerment. Well, one of the things we talked about was time, right? So when a person comes in and says, this is what I want to achieve, right? So this is what I want. And, in the fitness world right now, the problem is that there's you got so many crazy promises, right? Yeah, you can lose 30 pounds in 8 weeks, which I'm not saying it's not possible. We know it's possible. I'm saying, but can you do it in a healthy way, sustainable way, so on and so forth. So when people come in, like, I wish I could do a minority report and draw stuff in the air right now to show you the chart. But imagine that you have, intensity and time, right? And you drew this for your client, right? You drew a chart for your client. You said, well, the results that you want, right? If you want them in this amount of time, here's what it will take, right? It will take this much intensity. And the intensity involves everything from, more intense meal planning and preparing, more intense details when it comes to how you're eating, where you might be having to track calories more, I would say more closely. And, you have to pay a lot more attention to things, okay? Your training will have to be more intense. You may have to train 5 days a week to get to this result that you want in the time frame that you want it. Now, there's another way to go about this, right? And let me show you another option or another couple of options where, the intensity of this would be lower. So you wouldn't have to make these insane changes, these quick changes, these really intense changes in your program or your nutrition. And it'll take a little bit longer, but here's what we can do. And you give them the choice, right? Because you outlined as an expert, but like you were very upfront, based on science, based on real world results, what the options are. It's like, absolutely, we can go this route of what you want in this time frame, but here's what it's going to take. But here are some other options, right? And I don't think that a lot of people do that because, well, number one, you got to go back to being ethical and saying like, hey, I got to be, like I have to be honest. I have to be, completely open about the reality of what's going to happen. And some people don't do that because they're scared of losing the sale. Where I think that, when you are completely honest, like people are like, oh, wow, okay, you know what? Like now I have this choice. Now, obviously, like some people live in la la land and will try to go the, different route with the fast result, with the cheapest thing. And that they're not going to get that. But, that's kind of like beyond, I would say, this conversation. So the reality is that once you outline these things for them, right, they choose what they'll do, like longer, shorter, more versus less intense. But what happens is the prediction goes up, right? So when the prediction goes up, the safety goes up and the threat goes down, right? So now we can have this that we want, right? Because like I said, truly great coaching is about defining safety and threat. So we're starting to do that. And, make sure that you're listening without judgment. And I've brought up, motivational interviewing before, but judgment is threat. Actually, that's a humongous threat. We talked about earlier about, speaking on stage and how public speaking is such a humongous threat for people because you're feeling like you're going to get judged. Well, much of threat is the result of the fear of being judged. Once again, it's that story, right? So know that the fear of judgment manifests itself as shame. And shame is the fear of exclusion and isolation. And shame is a belief that we're flawed. Now, so think about like socially, isolation and exclusion is one of the most fearful and painful things that we can experience. And it's also the belief we're flawed and, in some way unworthy of acceptance and belonging. So this is why so much conformity exists. But think about that, going back to coaching, we're talking about defining safety, defining threat. And it's very important that you look at yourself and say, in what way are you judging your clients, right? Because shame is like, who we should be. We talk about that conformity, right? Who we think we should be. Shame is, how we should be. Shame is what we should be. And the shame load is too high when we have those and we create threat. And right then and there, your knowledge of the X's and O's of nutrition and fitness and business and marketing, or whatever realm you're in, starts becoming a little more irrelevant because we can't get the clients out of their own way, right? Once again, when I say client, think back to yourself as well, like getting yourself out of your own way and this out of your own way, because that's like the step number one, right? Telling the truth to yourself about yourself. And so how do we counter shame, right? What is the superpower that beats shame? And that's empathy, right? And think about these phrases, right? I mean, not just these phrases, but really truly living in that is, hey, I understand what that's like, right? Because empathy creates connection. And connection is like one of the most powerful feelings that we have. And obviously that creates trust. So, hey, I understand it's happened to me or similar. You're normal, right? You're not being excluded, right? Those are all things that reduce threat. So this is a drill that you can stop and do. And it's called the judgment check, right? So choose 3 labels that could apply to you, right? So look for like 5 to 10 different stereotypes that apply to that label. I actually, did this drill. I'm going to just throw it in there real quick, but it was like alpha male, overconfident, cocky, leader, close to opinion of others, right? And the question was, do you fit all those stereotypes? And once again, like when you write it out, you go like, no, not really, right? So for instance, because you do this drill for yourself, it just shows that like when we stereotype people, like we're so quick to do it. The person that walks in and the way they're dressed and whether they're overweight or, they got a limp or they're this religion, that, like we're always stereotyping. So this is a drill. It's like very, very, very important for you to recognize these things in yourself and whether you're doing them. Because once again, right, hey, I asked, do you fit all those stereotypes, right? So if you did this drill, choose 3 labels that could apply to you. Okay, look for 5 to 10 stereotypes that apply to that label. Write them out. Pause the podcast. Spend 5 minutes doing that. I'm going to pretend that you paused the podcast and you came back. Fantastic. All right. So do you fit all those stereotypes? No. Okay, cool. Neither does your client, right? Neither does your client in the stereotypes that you're putting on them. So, every time, you remember that, like, a stereotype is a prejudgment, right? That's what it really is. And every time you make a statement, it's a judgment, right? And you got to ask yourself, hey, what does that mean to you? How did that make you feel? How do you feel about where it takes you? Right. Once again, like a lot of coaching is exploring ourselves so we can help others explore themselves. Right. So just remember that like empathy beats shame, and that we have to find out like if we're judging because that's creating not only the fear of exclusion, it's creating shame, and it's creating this cycle where we really can't help people get out of their own way because we're actually part of the problem a lot of times. Right. So when things are unclear, and, you don't have clarity, like ask questions, and this is something we've touched on, but I'm glad that I kind of like prefaced getting to this, right? Because if you lead their answers, it will change and shape the conversations to whatever they think they should say because they feel judged, if that makes sense. I'm going to repeat that because that's a pretty deep thought, right? If you lead their answers, it'll change or shape the conversation to whatever they think they should say because they feel judged. See, that's why reducing threat is so important, that you can actually get the reality out of people. And if I start, talking, this is actually one on the business coaching call for my mentorship program that I did today. I was talking about, something that comes up in leadership, which is Simon Sinek talks about this, like leaders eat last, but they always also speak last. Now, I will preface this. I'm getting better at this, but nowhere near great at this. But just did in the last meeting, where when you come in and you state the problem, you don't pre-frame it with anything. You don't talk. You just say, hey, what do you guys think we can do here? What do you think is a solution? And you let everybody else speak before you speak, because that way you don't do exactly this, right? You don't change the conversation to whatever they think they should say, right? Because they'll feel judged because you're, whatever, the leader and the person that they look up to or whatever it may be, right? So that's very, very important, right? 80% of the things coming out of your mouth should be questions. Only speak maximal 20% of the time. We've talked about this in sales, but this is not a sales thing. This is really coaching. This is, leading your clients to, or guiding your clients to success. Just know that dominating and shaping the conversations is judging. And that's, man, that was like one of the big things that I used to do. Not saying I don't do it at all anymore, but that, I consciously worked on this to not jump in, to not just wait for people to stop talking so that I could talk, or because you feel insecure, you have to answer, right? Because like, oh, I know this, right? This is a big thing that I would say in coaching keeps coming up, right? Because we're so passionate about what we do, and if you're an expert in your field, like you want to answer all this stuff, but remember that. If there's a constant back and forth, then it's like verbal ping pong. That's judgment too. Like bam, 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 right? Like, where are we going? Are we really there to help the client, or does it become, do we just kind of lose track of it and it becomes a bus about us being right and us knowing more, right? But if our goal is to really help guide the client to their Everest, like this is a skill set that you have to build. There's an awareness you have to build, that you may be your biggest emergency brake in helping your clients get results. So with that said, the coach has to help the client define the game that they're playing, right? And the reality is that the game everyone is playing is happiness. It's just like how they get there is different, because whatever question like, hey, I want to lose 30 pounds. Okay, why is that important to you, right? And it'll be, oh, because I want to get into my jeans. Why is that important to you, right? Like, it's a happiness and status type of thing, and so we just have to understand that. Well, you have to find out what's the core desired emotion that people want to get. What's the feeling that people want to get? Think about that, right? There's a core desired emotion that everybody wants to achieve, and we want to get to that. So identifying the game, there's three things you got to find out. One, the purpose, and what is the game, right? What is the game? What's the game being played, and what's the desired feeling behind the game? And we've talked so much about like the why, right? If it's ever been a sales thing, or it's like even in your own life, like you got to find the why behind, so you find a meaning behind it, so that there's actually fuel there's a fuel that fires up all the action that's going to have to be done, right? All the work that's going to have to be done. Because if we don't find like the true deep meaning to anybody's, I would say, goals, and like we talked about Thrive before, it is really going to be like when times get tough, they're going to fall off, right? Because it's just like the surface reason why they're doing it. And a lot of times what people do, so there's a great point here that I wrote a long time ago, is finding out what the person doesn't want to do, and you'll get to what they want to do. And I think sometimes people don't know what they want, but they know what they don't want. And asking those questions is important. Like, because what rules are there in this game for them, and think about the rules as far as like what's non-negotiable for them. What's the filter? Like, I want to achieve this, but I won't do that. I won't stop, going out with my friends on a Saturday, or like, what are the rules, right? What are the limits, if any, and why, right? And do these rules add or take away from the pleasure of the game? Because that's what's really important. Because if you don't find the game pleasurable in some way, it's going to be a problem. And this is kind of like twisting things around, because we know things are challenging, but hey, what do you need to start doing to make the game worth playing, right? These are all like great, fantastic questions, once again, for yourself and for your clients. And what do you need to stop doing, and why, right? And we've talked about those 4 segments before, right? What do you keep doing? What do you stop doing? What do you start doing, right? And that's very important, because you don't want to instruct, you want to extract, right? Don't instruct, but extract, because it makes them co-conspirators in their success. And like, this comes back to that self-determination theory, as far as having autonomy and having choices. And also, like, you got to talk to to your clients about what will be the consequences if you break the rules, right? How will you get back in the game? Those are the things that most people never talk about, but it's like, what's the obstacle that you're going to face, right? And if you don't do X, Y, Z, what are the consequences going to be for you, right? Once again, we talked about safety and threat and like knowing what's coming. These are all the things that help with that, right? They identify the future, right? They reduce threat because we know the obstacles and we know the rules of the game. So, what will be the circumstances that cause you to abandon the game, right? If we know these, then it's a lot easier to coach and it's a lot easier to know. Now, remember this, you're not an expert in your client's life. And the thing is, you don't have to be, right? They are way more of an expert than you are. And that's why this, extracting versus instructing is so important. And you shouldn't have a lot of answers, but you should have a lot of questions and guidance, right? Now, I'm gonna skip to something that's like really, really, really powerful here, right? I've talked about environments before, so I'm not gonna jump into this, but something that's called sentence stemming. And this is something that, one, you can use for yourself, and two, that you can use with your clients. And look, there's a couple of different scenarios and variations that I'm gonna outline here for you, but this is very, very powerful, right? A great question to ask is like, what is important to you about, and then fill in the blank, right? These are sentence stemming things. And the cool thing is that like, we did this drill a long time ago. And the question was, okay, I would love my life if, and then just start writing, right? And I actually had these are a couple of mine, like real ones, by the way, not just made up ones, right? And remember, this could be anything. I would be a great dad if. I would be a great, coach if. I would be a great husband if. But in this case, it was like, I would love my life if I can I can let go of my guilt. I can take care of the people that I love. I can step on a bigger stage to create change for people around me. Funny thing is, here it says I can purchase a building and create a vigor ground building, which is reality now, right? I can see my family more. So I went down this list, and it's a great drill. But the cool thing about this is that, like, when you sentence stem, you can dig deeper, right? So you can go and keep sentence stemming anything that comes out of this. So, for instance, if you're in a business and you say, hey, I would love my business if, and you start sentence stemming, right? If I would be in the role of educator, leader, motivator 90% of the time. And then you could take that and say, I would be in the role of educator, leader, motivator 90% of the time if ... Can you see how this starts getting down to the nitty gritty? But it starts with essentially what starts with is finding out, right? This is the extraction that I talked about. Not instructing, but extracting, because if you can extract, how much easier is it to define, the game and the steps of the game? So much easier, right? So the first step is, thinking about this is like, we call it putting the pin back in the grenade. But when we, that way we're safe and we're not threatened. So we can actually address the goals. So notice, like, sentence stemming allows us to do that because we're actually finding out what the goals are, like what's real, right? Let's get rid of all the threat, put the pin back in a hand grenade, and find out what's really going on. So, because remember, it's when you require something, it's a threat that you're not going to get it, right? So you want to create more desires for your clients and have them have less requirements, right? Desires versus requirements. Because automatically, if you require something that you don't have, it creates lack, right? And so enjoy the process of desires. You don't enjoy your requirements, right? So if you really want to make a change, help the client enjoy the process, right? They come for the results, but they stay for the experience. So that's really, really important. And sentence stemming is a drill that helps you kind of break that down. I mean, I would strongly encourage you to actually go deeper into the rabbit hole of the sentence stemming, because it really, really is powerful. And think of it this way, right? Like for somebody that's come from I would say an environment of high level athletes and training like crazy and pushing myself, that instead of training people to failure, training them to success, right? I mean, that know that like for many people, they have to enjoy it. It doesn't mean that it won't be hard, but still thinking about how you can make the process more enjoyable. And it starts with everything that I've been talking about, right? You wouldn't believe, like it was crazy that, when I started asking more questions, when I started coaching more from this perspective of reducing threat and extracting versus instructing more, how people were essentially like figuring things out for themselves a lot more and doing the things that before I would be frustrated about, like, man, I'm telling them to do all these things and they're not doing them, and like, what's wrong with them? And you could, the aura of the coaching would already tell the story, and like people would feel judged, and they just shame themselves more, because that's a lot of people do that. And like, once again, when I say a lot of people do that, think of yourself about how you do that in certain areas of your life. Once again, always turn and dial around to saying like point the finger, right? Point the finger back to yourself. And with that said, like this is just kind of like I would say a tactic, a strategy that I'd have you consider using in any of your businesses. Okay. So if you guys have I can't remember like which TED Talk it was, but I dug deep into this, that like people remember the last part of any experience, right? So I said earlier, hey, instead of training people to failure, train them to success, right? So now if you think that the last part of any experience is the one that people remember the most, there was, I think this one study when it was actually gynecology, which I'm like, what the hell is this guy's like bringing up gynecology in his coaching podcast. But what they did is that they just did an experiment of like after a gynecology visit, like how would the woman feel if she left right away versus if she stayed another 5 to 7 minutes, and the doctor would make her feel really comfortable and calm, and kind of bring that the uncomfortable part of the process down and get them to smile. And then they had all, and this was like a pretty big number, had all these women fill out a form. And, one group, the one that like left right away, was like, oh, the visit was like, it wasn't good. It was uncomfortable. It was terrible. The others were like, oh, the doctor was really nice. And like they had a completely different experience. And yet 95 or 97% of that experience was the same for everybody. It was just the last 3 to 5% was different, but their perception of it was completely different. So with that said, why don't you not only start training session with something pleasurable, but then end them, right? End them in a way where people are winning. Now, and that could be anything from, mobility drills and PRI and foam rolling, why we love doing stories at the end, right? So like shining a light on something. Jess in a lot of classes should be like, hey, what's one thing that you're really excited about today? What's one win that you had? Or J1 will tell stories, and in our team trainings, telling stories at the end, so people are empowered by it, like, and they get a great feeling before they leave. Same thing if you have one-on-one clients or semi-private clients. What are the things that you can do to make that last 3 to 5% of the experience fantastic? And that's what they're leaving with. They're leaving with feeling like they're winning, like they're just on a high. So that's very, very important. And here's just a couple of things, couple of like bullet points that hopefully stick out. Cause maybe you're hearing me say a lot of stuff, and I am going through a lot of stuff, through a lot of notes, and I'll follow up with this. I mean, there's a lot of the coaching, I would say, principles, strategies, and tactics that I like to share. And there's a lot more of this stuff, but helping clients keep the main thing. We just kind of went through a bunch of a number of principles and tactics on how to get somebody to actually say what they want, what is winning the game for them anyways, right? And then keeping them on track with what Dan John says, keeping the goal, but helping clients keep the main thing, so that they don't start veering off and pursuing something that actually doesn't matter to them. Just bringing out their greatness. I think there's too much of negativity still in coaching, and it's like expanding their best efforts. And we're talking about like building on strength, unconditional positive regard, shining a light on the positivity. Obviously there's the maintaining accountability, but accountability happens first by people going down to like, what is their why, reducing threat, and truly saying what the game is and what their win is and what the rules are. And once we have that, it's a lot easier to keep people accountable. And focus on feelings when clients get fixated on results, right? I would say even sometimes that's like focus on, behaviors that are attached to feelings rather than get clients fixated on results, because people are there for the feelings, right? And feelings run a lot of things. Big thing, bringing out people's greatness, have a victory journal. Some people say 3 wins, but for clients, it's very, very powerful to have a victory journal. So write out your victories before you go to bed. I mean, that's a very, very simple one. With that thing said, all right. Whew. I just went through a lot of stuff. We're going to end it on that note, but I would strongly encourage you. The thing that I probably like the most out of the things that I shared is the sentence stemming, because it really allows you to dig deep on your own stuff, as well as a drill that's great with the clients, because you'll see like them bringing out a lot of things that you didn't know. Once again, we talked about the 80-20, and that's the minimum, right? Like 80% of questions, 20% of answers, extracting versus instructing, not getting your clients results, but helping them get out of their own way so that they get their own results, right? Those are all some like big kind of type concepts, but do the sentence stemming in an area of your own life that, you kind of want to figure out, like, what would it mean for you to win, right? So I would be a great coach if, I would love my business if, my business would be a success if. I dig down a rabbit hole with this one. So do that, and then also do it with a client or maybe a group of clients in your next, whether it's a seminar or team meeting or anything else. And, as always, hey, do something, right? That's the big kicker. Like, we just came off a business coaching call, and it's like, what was the main thing that you extracted? So out of everything that I said, what's the main point that you got today? Okay, what is the action step associated with that point? What are you going to do? Like, knowledge is nothing without application, right? Knowledge plus application equals wisdom, because then we can reflect and keep doing it. If we had a great results, we can course correct. But the reality is, without that, there's nothing. So hopefully you got a lot out of this coaching. As always, hey, I really appreciate the 5-star reviews on iTunes, heading over there, because that's the best way to spread the word and, get other people to listen to this podcast and improve coaching, improve life, improve business, whatever the topic at hand is. Like I said, that's why this is the Vigor Life, putting the puzzle pieces together to your own extraordinary life. I love and appreciate you. I will see you in the next episode. Peace out.